All right, so up until this point, we've learned how to graph using vertex form, but we have to know what to do if our equation is not in vertex form. So we've seen that our vertex form is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. But that's not the only form that you can see a quadratic in. You can also see it in standard form, which is this form here. And so what we want to do and what we're going to do today is learn how to go from standard form to vertex form so that we can then figure out what the vertex is. So that would be called, when we do this, when we go from standard form to vertex form, it's called completing the square. And so that's what we're going to go over today. So to complete the square, we need to know what these A, B, and C represent. So A represents the number in front of x squared. So it's a number, so something like 5, 6, something like that. So it's always the number in front of the x squared term. So it's always in front of the x squared. B is always the number in front of the x term. The x term. And C represents the constant, or the number by itself. So now that we know what each of those pieces mean, that'll help us a little bit complete the square, or turn that standard form into vertex form. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rewrite the equation. So we have this ax squared plus bx plus c. So we have it in standard form. We're going to rewrite the equation so that it looks like this. We're going to leave a space for a number. It's going to be in parentheses ax squared plus bx plus blank plus c minus blank. So what we did is we basically took these two pieces and separated it from the constant. So we're going to add something on the inside and subtract something on the outside to keep our equation balanced. So then to figure out what goes in that blank, we're going to find the value doing b divided by 2 and squaring it. So we're going to take the b value and we're going to divide it by 2. And then whatever we get from that, we're going to square that value. And that is going to be the number that goes, whatever we get here is going to go in both of these blanks. So then once we've filled in those blanks, we can factor inside the parentheses. And we can simplify the number outside the parentheses. So we're going to look at an example. You may want to pause in case you need to catch up on your steps. But then we're going to go on and do an example together. So if we look at this example here using these steps, so we're going to remember, we're going to separate these two pieces from that piece. So we have x squared plus 12x plus blank plus 20 minus blank. Remember, we're going to add that number on the inside and subtract it on the outside. So then to figure out what that number is, we take b divided by 2 and we square it. So in this case, b, that number in front of the x term, is 12. We divide it by 2. 12 divided by 2 would give me 6. 6 squared is 36. So what's going to happen is this equation is now going to have 36 in that blank spot. So with that 36 there, we can then factor this piece here. We can factor it. What multiplies to give us 36 and adds to give us 12? Well, if we think 36 would be 6 times 6. So this is the same as x plus 6 times x plus 6. But for the purpose of completing the square, first of all, these should always be the same. For completing the square, we want both of these terms to be exactly the same. So they should always end up being the exact same factors from this piece inside the parentheses. Because then we can write it as x plus 6 squared. And then when we simplify the outside, 20 minus 36 would give me negative 16. And look, now you have the equation in vertex form. If we look back at the top, remember our vertex form is something squared plus something else. That's exactly what we have here. And then if we wanted to figure out what our vertex is, remember we keep the same, we change the sign from the inside, so this becomes negative 6, and we keep the sign from the number on the outside, so this becomes negative 16. So the vertex would be at negative 6, negative 16. So completing the square allows us to write a quadratic in vertex form, which then allows us to identify that vertex that we use for graphing. All right, so let's try a couple more examples on this page together. So number 1, and I might need to use some room over here. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to make room on your paper. Make room in your equation, because remember we got to complete the square. So we have x squared plus 10x plus blank plus 13 minus blank. And then we've got to figure out what goes in this spot here and here. So to do that, we use the equation b divided by 2 and we square it. So b is 10, so 10 divided by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared would give me 25. So in that blank, and I'm just going to write it down here, so I have x squared plus 10x plus 25 plus 13 minus 25. So now I'm going to factor this piece here. So what multiplies to give me 25 and adds to give me 10? And remember, they need to be the two factors that are exactly the same. So we would have 5 and 5, which we could just write as x plus 5 squared. And then if I simplify this piece, 13 minus 25 would give me negative 12. So here is my vertex form, so then to find my vertex, remember we switch the sign, making this negative 5, and we keep the sign, making this negative 12. So our vertex here would be negative 5, negative 12. So I'm going to clean this up and we'll go over number 2 together as well. All right, let's look at number 2. So remember, the first thing we're going to do is separate those first two terms. So I've got x squared minus 6x plus blank minus 1 minus blank. Right? We always put the plus on the inside and the minus on the outside. So then we're going to do b divided by 2 squared to tell us what that number is that's going to go in each of those blanks. So I have negative 6 divided by 2 squared would give me negative 6 divided by 2 would give me negative 3. Negative 3 squared means negative 3 times negative 3. So that's going to give us positive 9. So that means in that blank, I'm going to write a positive 9. So I have x squared minus 6x plus 9 minus 1 minus 9. So remember, we can factor this part. So it multiplies to give us 9 and adds to give us negative 6. Remember, your factors have to be exactly the same. So because this is a minus sign here, these both have to be minus signs. And then two numbers that multiply to give me 9 and add to give me 6 would be 3 and 3. So I can write this as x minus 3 squared, and then negative 1 minus 9 would give me negative 10. So here's my vertex form. And then to find my vertex, I change the sign from here, so negative 3 becomes positive 3, and I keep the sign from here, so it's going to be a negative 10. So my vertex is 3, negative 10. All right, let's try this last one together. Let's do a different color. Great. All right, so remember, we're going to separate these first. So I have x squared minus 2x plus blank plus 2 minus blank. So all I did was separate my first two terms from my last one, plus blank on the inside, minus blank on the outside. Then to figure out what goes inside these blanks, what fills in this spot, we take the b value, divide by 2, and square it. So my b value here, remember the b value is the number in front of x, so that would be negative 2 divided by 2 squared. Negative 2 divided by 2 would give me negative 1. Negative 1 squared would be negative 1 times negative 1, which would be positive 1. So inside that parentheses, we put a positive 1, and outside we put a positive 1. So then when I simplify, we're going to factor this. So that gives me two numbers that multiply to give me 1 and add to give me negative 2. So remember, because this b value is negative, that means both my factors are going to be negative. And then what multiplies to give me 1 and adds to give me negative 2 would be negative 1 and negative 1. So I could write that as x minus 1 squared. And then I clean up this piece, negative 2 plus, positive 2, positive 2 minus 1 would just give me positive 1. So here would be my vertex form. So then to find my vertex, I change the sign inside the parentheses, so negative 1 becomes positive 1, and I keep the sign on the outside, so this is going to stay positive 1. All right, so hopefully with these 4 examples, you were able to figure out completing the square. If not, come to office hours tomorrow. We can go over some more examples together. But the goal is that you finish page 224, those problems on the back on your own. So go ahead and work on those. I'm going to collect page 224. So if you have any questions, come to office hours. And hopefully you guys are doing good.